The question hung in the air like poison. "With all due respect, sweetheart, are you certain you belong here?" Judge Victoria Sterling's voice dripped with condescension as she peered over her designer glasses at the small figure standing center stage. Around her, 50 other young performers whispered and giggled. Some covered their mouths in mock sympathy. Others openly stared at her faded dress, her scuffed shoes, her hair pulled back in simple braids. This was the National Youth Vocal Championship, where careers were born and legends discovered. Every child here had private coaches, professional headshots, and parents who could afford the $5,000 entry fee. Every child except Amara. "I'm in the right place, ma'am," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Judge Marcus Thornton, seated to Sterling's left, didn't even glance up from his phone. He typed lazily, his diamond cufflinks catching the spotlight. "Let's make this quick. We have real talent to evaluate today." The third judge, Catherine Moore, smiled that particular smile adults use when they've already made up their minds. "What song have you prepared, dear?" Amara took a breath that seemed to draw from somewhere deeper than her lungs. "I'll be singing Rise Up by Andrade." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a classical piece. It wasn't from the approved repertoire list. It was a song born from struggle, from defiance, from the very experience these judges had spent their lives avoiding. Sterling exchanged glances with Thornton. Moore actually laughed, a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "How unconventional," Sterling said, her voice ice over steel. "Well, let's get this over with so we can move on to the qualified candidates." She picked up her phone again, dismissing Amara before she'd sung a single note. What none of them knew was that Amara had been singing since she could speak. In the choir at Bethel Community Church, where her grandmother led worship every Sunday. In the kitchen, where her mother hummed while working double shifts as a hospital cleaner. In the shelter where they'd lived for 6 months after her father died, where music was the only luxury they could afford. Her grandmother, Sister Ruth Williams, had won every gospel competition in 3 states back in the 70s. She'd turned down record deals to raise her family, but her gift ran in the blood. When Amara was 7, Ruth had placed her wrinkled hands on her granddaughter's face and said, "Baby girl, God gave you a voice that can shake heaven. Don't you ever let this world tell you where you can and cannot sing." "Whenever you're ready," Thornton said, not looking up. His tone suggested he was doing her a tremendous favor by even being present. Moore had already marked something on her score sheet. A 0, perhaps, or simply the word "no" written in decisive red ink. Amara closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't standing on this hostile stage. She was in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by family who believed in her. She was in her mother's arms after her father's funeral, finding comfort in melody when words failed. She was every black girl who'd been told she didn't belong, who'd been measured by her circumstances rather than her soul. When she opened her mouth, the first note emerged like a prayer. Pure, powerful, impossible. It started soft, almost conversational, as if she were telling a secret to a friend. But then it built, climbing and expanding, until it filled every corner of the Imperial Theater, like light flooding a dark room. The effect was instantaneous. Sterling's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered on the judge's table. Thornton's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Moore's pen stopped mid-stroke, frozen above her score sheet. Around the theater, the whispers died. The giggles ceased. Every person in that room felt the same thing, a recognition that they were witnessing something rare and undeniable. "You're gonna rise up," Amara sang, and her voice climbed to heights that shouldn't have been possible for a 12-year-old. No strain, no effort, just pure crystalline sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical. The chandelier above her head actually vibrated, crystals tinkling in harmony. The other young performers stared in stunned silence. Some of them had trained for years with the best vocal coaches money could buy. They'd learned technique, breath control, diction. But what Amara possessed couldn't be taught. It could only be given a gift that transcended training and privilege. Sterling slowly stood from her seat, her face drained of color. Thornton set down his phone with trembling hands. Moore's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing something underneath that looked like shame. Because they all knew in that moment that they had almost made a catastrophic mistake. When Amara held the final note, it seemed to suspend time itself. The sound hung in the air for 5 impossible seconds, then 6, then 7. Her eyes were still closed, her face peaceful, as if she were somewhere else entirely, as if she were standing in a place where judges and prejudice couldn't touch her. The silence after she finished was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. It was the kind of silence that follows revelation, when the world has shifted and everyone knows it, but no one has found words yet. Then, from the back of the theater, a single person began to clap. It was another contestant, a white girl in an expensive dress who'd been whispering cruel comments earlier, but now her face was wet with tears. "That was incredible," she said, her voice breaking. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The applause that followed was explosive. Sterling cleared her throat, visibly struggling to compose herself. I apologize, Miss Williams. I've never." She couldn't finish. For perhaps the first time in her career, Victoria Sterling had no words. Thornton stood as well, his professional mask completely shattered. "Where did you train?" "I didn't, sir," Amara said quietly. "My grandmother taught me in our living room. My mother taught me while we sang together doing chores. I learned in church, where people sing because they have to, not because someone's watching. The truth of it hung there heavy and undeniable. While these judges had been seeking technical perfection, they'd almost rejected genuine artistry." Moore wiped at her eyes, mascara smearing. "I need to explain something," she said, her voice thick. 20 years ago, I was the only black judge on a panel like this. I let them convince me to reject talented black kids because they didn't fit the image. I told myself I was being objective, but I was just protecting my position by sacrificing others. She looked directly at Amara. "I became what once hurt me, and I'm ashamed." The confession rippled through the theater. Several parents shifted uncomfortably. Some of the other judges from other panels, watching from the wings, looked away, because Moore had just named the unspoken truth that everyone knew but no one acknowledged. Sterling walked around the judges' table and approached the stage. Up close, Amara could see that the older woman's hands were shaking. "My mother was a jazz singer in Harlem," Sterling said quietly. "She was brilliant, but she spent her whole life being told she wasn't refined enough, wasn't classical enough. She died believing she'd failed." She looked at Amara with something like desperation. "I spent my career trying to prove I was different from her, that I belonged in these spaces. And in doing that, I became exactly what destroyed her." Thornton remained at the table, but his expression had transformed entirely. "I don't have a story like theirs," he admitted. "I just never thought about it. I never had to. And that's its own kind of crime, isn't it?" He picked up his score sheet and slowly, deliberately, tore it in half. "We're not scoring you, Miss Williams, because what you have can't be measured on our little scale." The head coordinator of the competition rushed onto the stage, confused by the disruption. Sterling turned to her with sudden authority. "Margaret, we need to discuss the entry requirements for this competition, the $5,000 fee, the professional photo requirement, the recommendation letters from accredited vocal institutions." She gestured to Amara. "These barriers have nothing to do with talent and everything to do with access." "Victoria, those standards ensure quality," Margaret protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Around the theater, people were already pulling out phones, recording, posting. The moment was going viral in real time. A hashtag was born before Margaret could finish her sentence. The truth was out. Moore stood beside Sterling. "I'm proposing a complete restructuring. Full scholarships for any qualified student, regardless of financial background. Blind initial auditions, where we hear voices before we see faces, and a diverse panel of judges who understand that excellence comes in many forms." She looked back at Amara. "We almost lost something irreplaceable today because of our prejudice. How many others have we already lost?" The coordinator tried to regain control. "This is highly irregular. We can't just change decades of policy because of one audition." But Sterling cut her off with a look that could freeze fire. "Then consider this my resignation, effective immediately. Unless we change, I won't be part of this institution's continued discrimination." Thornton stood slowly. "Mine too." Moore nodded. "And mine." The three judges who had moments before been ready to dismiss Amara without a second thought were now willing to sacrifice their positions for her. Not because she'd shamed them, but because she'd shown them who they'd become. Margaret looked panicked. The competition had just lost its entire judging panel on live video, in front of dozens of witnesses and thousands of online viewers. "Please, let's discuss this rationally." But rational was what had built these barriers in the first place. What was needed now was revolutionary. Sterling turned back to Amara, who had stood silent through this entire upheaval. "Miss Williams, I have a proposition. My late mother left me her brownstone in Harlem. It's been empty for 3 years. I'd like to convert it into a music school, a real one, where talent is the only requirement." She swallowed hard. "And I'd like you to be the first student, full scholarship, room and board, if you need it. And when you're ready, when you're grown and established, maybe you'll come back and teach the next generation." The offer hung in the air like a miracle. Amara looked out into the audience, where her mother sat in the back row, her hospital scrubs still on from her shift. Her mother's face was streaming with tears, her hand pressed to her mouth. Beside her, Grandmother Ruth stood tall and proud, nodding slowly. "I accept," Amara said simply, "on one condition. My grandmother has to be on the faculty. She knows more about real music than anyone in this building." Sterling smiled, genuine and warm for the first time. "Agreed." 6 months later, the Sterling Williams Academy of Musical Arts opened its doors in a renovated Harlem brownstone. 30 students, all from underprivileged backgrounds, all bursting with raw talent. Sister Ruth Williams taught gospel and soul traditions, Catherine Moore taught classical technique, Marcus Thornton, who'd left his corporate consultancy, taught music business and rights, and Victoria Sterling, who'd spent her career building walls, now spent her days tearing them down. The academy became famous not for its exclusivity, but for its radical inclusion. Record labels started attending their recitals. Universities offered automatic scholarships to their graduates. But more importantly, the students learned that their voices mattered exactly as they were. On opening night, Amara sang again, not in competition, but in celebration. Her mother and grandmother sat in the front row. The theater was packed with people who'd seen her viral audition, who'd followed her story, who wanted to witness what happened when talent was given opportunity instead of obstacles. When she finished, Sterling joined her on stage. "I spent 20 years in music industry," she told the audience. "I thought I knew what excellence sounded like, but I was only listening for what I'd been taught to hear. This young woman taught me that the most beautiful music often comes from places we've been trained to ignore." Amara took the microphone, her voice steady and sure. "My father used to say that our voices are our power. They can't take it away, can't silence it, can't diminish it unless we let them." She looked at the young faces in the audience, so many of them black and brown, seeing themselves reflected on that stage, perhaps for the first time. So don't let them. Sing loud, sing true. And never, ever let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't belong. 3 years later, Amara Williams became the youngest person ever to win the National Vocalist Award. Her acceptance speech was short. "I dedicate this to every kid who's been told they don't belong. You do. Your voice matters. And the only permission you need to sing is your own." The camera panned to the audience, where Sterling, Moore, and Thornton sat together, applauding with tears in their eyes. They'd been given a second chance by a 12-year-old girl with a voice that could shake heaven, and they'd taken it. The Sterling Williams Academy is still operating today, has produced dozens of successful artists. Every year on its anniversary, they screen the video of Amara's audition for new students. Not to show them what talent looks like, but to show them what courage looks like. The courage to stand in a room that doesn't want you and sing anyway. The courage to force the world to hear you, not despite who you are, but because of it. And somewhere in Harlem, in a brownstone that once sat empty, young voices rise up every day. Voices that might have been silenced, voices that might have been dismissed, voices that are now being heard, celebrated, and recognized for exactly what they are: irreplaceable, undeniable, and finally free.